Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. My name is Mike Carlin. I'm your host, and today I'm pleased to introduce you to RaeAnne Thayne. RaeAnne is the New York Times, USA Today, and Publishers Weekly bestselling author of more than 70, that's 70 novels. She finds inspiration in the beautiful northern Utah mountains, where it just stopped snowing, and where she lives with her family. Her stories have been described as poignant and sweet, with beautiful, honest storytelling that goes straight to the heart. This is making my heart sing just reading this copy. Here today to talk about her latest novel, Summer at the Cape, is RaeAnne Thayne. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, RaeAnne.
Hi, Mike. I'm so thrilled to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you here. I'm very curious about the new book, but before we talk about that, I want to know, RaeAnne, where does your story as an author begin?
Probably when I was in high school. I was very involved in drama and debate, and my mom sort of felt like I was too heavily involved in that. I needed to sort of maybe, instead of taking 3 classes in my schedule that were involved in drama and debate, I should maybe try something else. So she pushed me into journalism, and I should probably backtrack a little bit. It maybe started when I discovered a love of reading, probably when I was about 6, and I was a voracious reader, read all the time. My mom was a big reader. My sisters are big readers as well. And so, I was constantly reading a book whenever I had the chance. I loved going to the library. I love all those, chances to explore other stories. And so when I went into journalism in high school, I realized this is what I loved. I love telling stories. It was maybe a different way to tell stories than when I was acting in plays and things like that, but I love telling stories. And so I went into a degree into journalism as a career. I worked for 10 years in newspapers and as a reporter and editor. But even then, I wanted to write a book, and I had the idea of I wanted to write a romance novel. That was what I loved to read. That I read, from the time I was probably 13. I read them constantly, and I wanted to write one day. And so I one day sat down to do it. I was on maternity leave with my daughter for my newspaper job. So I had this brand new first baby and decided that now's my time to start. And I didn't know what I was doing. I read books about how to write books. I'd never had a fiction writing class. I didn't know anything about what I didn't belong to any writers groups. I didn't go to any, writer classes. I just sat down and loved that world. I loved being able to dig in and create this world where I could have the characters do whatever I wanted them to do. And it basically started from that. It took me 5 years from that day to sell my first book. And I've been doing it ever since. My first one came out in 96, and here we are many years later.
And in 70, that's just a huge number. I mean, I'm looking at you, I'm like, you're not old enough to have written 70 books, but
I started young. Like I said, I had my first baby. I started young, but I've been doing 2 or 3 books a year since 1995, so that's how you get that many books.
Yeah. So tell me that the process with that first book, right? So you're home, you've got, a new baby at home, which I'm sure is requiring a lot of your attention. How do you find the time to write with this major life event which has just happened?
In that particular case, when she would nap, I would work. When she would go to bed at night, I would work. After I went back to work, a few months later, I still had this love of doing this. And so I would get up early before I would go to work and write for a couple of hours. And I would, take care of my daughter and then take her to daycare, unfortunately, and then go to work. And then sometimes I would come back a little bit early and write, and then go pick her up from daycare. Or sometimes I would, I'd get her, and when she would nap, I'd work. I was lucky enough when I went back to work, I was the news editor of the newspaper. And so my day was started early and ended early. So I had afternoons and evenings that were mostly free. And so I would work when she was in bed and just whenever I could. It was just my dream, and so I pursued it as much as I could. And I actually would take off vacation time and still maybe take her for a couple of hours to daycare so that I could work on this book that I had the idea of. And, back then I didn't know anything about submitting. And I should tell you, this was the early 90s. And so we didn't have emails. We didn't have, there weren't groups that you could join that would tell you how to do things. They were out there, but I was ignorant and lived in a little town in northern Utah, and I didn't know what my options were, So I was kind of on my own, but I had submitted a proposal to an editor, and she liked it. and asked me for the complete, and I wasn't done with it. And so I was in a panic thinking, how am I going to get this book done? So I would take some time off from work and try to work on it. And again, get up at 4 a.m. to write for an hour and a half or so before I had to get going for the day.
Yeah.
Somehow it happened. Somehow I made it work. I look back on that time and think, but I was younger. I was younger and I could had more energy then to work,
Sure.
Sleep for 5 hours a night and work and have a baby and write.
But that first one takes you 5 years to write. Now, obviously, jumping forward to writing 2, 3 a year, multiple a year, something must have changed about your writing process to be able to sort of, publish more frequently, or I don't want to say pump them out faster, but just kind of write them faster.
Right. Well, I actually did 2 books in that 5 years
Okay.
before I sold, and then I sold both of those books. So they bought both of the ones that I had been working on when I finally sold. And so after that, I worked and wrote for a while, but then we had our second child in 97, and I decided that was when I was going to write full time. And again, I had another new baby, and he had actually some health issues, and so that made things a little bit challenging. But I learned how to write in hospital rooms and learned how to write in wherever I could, taking my other daughter around to soccer practice and things like that. And I just I was able to work in small bursts, and while I was taking care of family, I would be thinking about the book. And so that I was lucky enough to get a editor at that point that I've worked with since then. She's been my editor for 70 books at Harlequin. And so they wanted more and more books from me. And so it was very difficult to say no at that point in my life because I needed the money because I'd quit my job, And so I was writing about 3 books a year. Of the shorter books, they were about 60,000 words for the, different romance lines that they had. And they were I started out in romantic suspense, which is very different from the books that I write now.
Yeah.
But and so I was fortunate. I felt fortunate that I had a career, that I had a publishing house that wanted my books. And so I just tried to do it, and make it work. I think most women writers, especially, we figure out how to make it work around taking care of our families.
Yeah. No doubt. So have you been with Harlequin the entire time?
So actually, no, they rejected my first books. And so I sold to a different publisher first. I was with Bantam Love Swept. Bantam Doubleday Dell had a romance line at that time called Love Swept. And they brought it back a few years ago anyway. But then that line was going to be discontinued. And I was fortunate enough to already be in the process of maybe looking around to write for 2 publishers. So I had an in already at Silhouette at the time, which was before they merged with Harlequin eventually. But I sold my 6th book, I would say, to Silhouette, and then I've been with them ever since.
Very cool. Very cool. What was the I assume you work with a literary agent to help make all this happen. What was that like for those first few books?
So I did not have an agent for my first 4 books. I just did that on my
Wow.
own. Again, I told you I was ignorant. I didn't know what I was doing.
Look at me making assumptions here.
I should have had an agent, but I didn't. But I did get an agent when I knew I wanted to write for 2 houses. And I was so glad that I did, because she sort of helped position me and she knew much more about the industry than I did. So she was able to find an editor that she thought would be a good fit. And obviously she was right, because here we are 70 books later. I've been with 70 projects, I should say, because I've done some novellas for Harlequin as well. But yeah, so I wouldn't, and then after she left the business, I would say after I'd done maybe 10 books with her. And so I didn't have an agent because I was only writing category romance, which I won't say only, because those are extremely hard. But I didn't have a single title. I didn't need a single title editor or agent at that point, because I knew what I was writing. I had a great relationship with my editor. I knew what they were paying. It was a fairly boilerplate contract, so there weren't a lot of things I could negotiate anyway in the contract at the time. So I did probably 10 books without a literary agent later. And then I wanted to write single title books. And so I knew I needed one for that. So I searched around and found a great one. And we were together for a long time and did a lot of great projects together.
Very cool. Very cool. At what point did you decide to leave your job in journalism? What point?
It was mainly when we were going to have our second child. I had 2. Our oldest was 5, and I was going to have a new baby, and I didn't want to take them to daycare and try to write and squeeze out time with them. So we just decided I would take the plunge. I'd already sold 5 books. I knew that I sort of was on a track to keep going, and so we thought, well, we'll just keep our fingers crossed. And it took me a long time before I made up to what I was making as a full-time. It took a long time, but I was lucky enough, as a writer, that I already had an in a publishing house, and I had already started to make inroads, there, and get a little bit of a name for myself, even though 5 books, weren't very much when it comes to romance. Honestly, readers want quantity. They're voracious for the romance readers. They like an author with a great big backlist. And so I'm lucky now, after 25 years, that I do have a good backlist.
You've got the backlist. So what drew you to romance? I mean, it sounds like that's what you enjoyed reading. But sometimes, what we enjoy reading isn't what we write. So what drew you into the genre?
Really, it was because that was where my heart was. That was the kind of books I love to read. I loved happy endings. And, when I went into journalism, I didn't realize it really wasn't a great personality fit for me. I had a hard time with the contention, with the people being angry and mad at the newspaper. And, when a small town newspaper, that was pretty much constant. Everybody was always mad at you. And so, I had to sort of realize that in my imaginary world, that's where I was, sort of able to have the freedom to have happy endings. And I loved that. It was very addicting to me. And I just feel like there's so much need for the books that I write there, and that other authors in this genre write. There's so much need for people to be reminded that this is important in the world. Caring about others is important, and love and having great home lives for children and all of that is really important. And so I'm happy that I can provide that. I'm happy that I can give people a happy ending. I love the emails that I get from readers that say, I'm going through cancer and your books are keeping me going. Or, my husband and I are struggling with our marriage, but we're reading your books together to remind each other how we should be treating each other. What more powerful thing could I want as a writer, to know that I'm making a difference, making people happy in their lives?
Yeah. Well, talk to me about Summer at the Cape. What's and I mean, obviously you can't give too much away, but tell me, at a high level, what's Summer at the Cape about?
Sure. This is a story about a family sort of struggling to come to terms with the death of one of their family members. So it concerns 3 sisters. Their parents divorced when they were young, and there's a girl, and then she had twins that were 2 years younger, and the twins went with their mother to live in Northern California at this little beach community, and she stayed with her father in LA. Now she's an attorney many years later, and one of the twins died tragically in an accident. And before she died, she had this dream of starting a glamp ground in this little Northern California area. And so the mother is trying to keep this dream alive of her daughter, but there's a lease dispute with the owner of the property that they were using. They didn't really have a formal lease, so the mother reaches out to her lawyer daughter saying, please come up and help me sort this out. So she comes to this little town, and then it's also about her sister, the other remaining twin, how she struggles to deal with the loss of her sister. And so it's kind of, it is a happy book, but there's certainly sad, bittersweet moments as the family all grieves, as they all try to come to terms with the different dynamics now of their family without this one family member.
Yeah. So when I initially saw the title, I live in Connecticut, and we summer on Cape Cod.
Right.
But I assume we're not talking about Cape Cod here.
No, it's a little town called Cape Sanctuary. And I had that issue when my publisher wanted this title. I was like, everyone's going to think it's Cape Cod, but they still said, oh, it just fits for the storyline. But I've done 4 books set in this little fictional town of Cape Sanctuary, which is sort of a mishmash of some of my favorite Pacific Coast beach towns. I'm a Western girl, and so my ocean is the Pacific for the most part. And so it's a mash between Cannon Beach, Oregon, and the Monterey Peninsula, little towns there like Pacific Grove and Carmel by the Sea and places like that.
Oh, yeah, beautiful.
They are gorgeous. Yes.
Love Carmel by the Sea every year. The Pebble Beach golf tournament is on early in the season.
Yeah, we watch it just for the scenery.
I know it's beautiful. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. Bing Crosby was big in that tournament back in the day. Back in the day.
It's lots of fun.
So have any of your books been turned into movies? Has Hallmark been calling at all?
They have reached out a few times, and I've had several options, but nothing right now in the works. We're still, keep our fingers crossed all the time. But I've had a couple of series optioned. I've written various like 6 or 7 book series that have been optioned before, but they haven't ever come to fruition. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that will happen someday. I really feel like readers, they've seen the success of things like, Robin Carr's series, and Cheryl Wood had a series that was successful. I think people love that idea of towns where there's interconnected stories, and that's very much the kind of stories that I tell.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, we do need like happy endings, right? I
Mhm.
mean, just the world, the way it's been, especially the past couple of years with our
Mhm.
pandemic and just the high level of anxiety we've had.
Oh, yes.
There's nothing like a good, wholesome, no, maybe not wholesome, but a good, a nice
Well, I
love
should
story.
say my books are on the wholesome side.
Oh,
So if
well, there,
that's
there
what
you go.
people are looking for, they'll find that in mine. And I have people that my books have been described as comfort reads. And I think some authors might find that offensive, but I actually love that. I love the idea that people might turn to my books when they need comfort, because if I can provide that to them, that's just a gift for me as well, to know that I'm making people happy.
Yeah, I mean that's why many people write. I mean, just to
Mhm.
to evoke some kind of emotion in somebody, and I love the notion of people taking comfort in books, kind of
Mhm.
books getting you through hard times.
Right.
So that's beautiful. So I do have a list of questions here that I ask everybody, and this is really they're really just designed to kind of understanding who my guests are as kind of people, which of course is what I want to do. I want to uncork their stories. So the first one up is interesting because sometimes authors have a hard time with it. But Rand, what were some of your favorite TV shows when you were a kid?
I loved Happy Days. I loved Joni Loves Chachi. Let's see, what else did I love when I was a kid? We always watched the reruns of like Little Rascals and things like that with my siblings. I grew up in a little Indiana farmhouse, and we didn't have any close friends nearby, and so we were all, very, very close with my family. So, and then my parents didn't let us watch a lot of TV in the summer times. They would kick us outside, so we would have to be outside playing and riding our bikes around and having fun that way. So
There you go. I loved Happy Days. I mean, that was. I mean, I had a picture of Henry Winkler.
oh,
Uh,
really?
this is gonna come out wrong, but over my bed as a kid because I was enamored with the Fonz. Like
Oh, yes.
I loved that character, Arthur Fonzarelli. And only one person on the show was allowed to call him Arthur, and that was Mrs. C. He was the only one. The
And
only
there was
one.
the mysterious missing Cunningham brother, right? There was an older
What
brother
there
before it
was,
started.
there
And
was,
he
and
mysteriously disappeared and was
yes,
never heard from again.
he got voted out of the writers' room at some point in time.
Right.
But Happy Days also sprung off a couple of other shows. I mean, you mentioned Joni Loves Chachi, but Mork and Mindy came out of Happy
Right.
Days.
I love
Um,
that one too. I love the Love Boat. I love
oh,
all.
I mean, when anyone on this show mentions the Love Boat, I have to pause because I started rewatching it during the pandemic, from season one, and I didn't realize there was a few Love Boat made for TV movies with slightly different cast members before Love Boat got picked up as a series. Um, all things I learned during my investigative research into the Pacific Princess. But I loved it. I loved Love Boat. I loved it so much as a kid. I used to play it with my friends. Like, other kids would play Star Wars. Me, my brother, neighborhood friends, we played Love Boat.
I
And
love that.
it was so much fun. It was so much fun in the show. I mean, there's a lot of Me Too moments in the show if you
Oh, yes.
if you look at
Oh,
it
yes.
now, but that Dr. Bricker was he could be in trouble these days, but a fine program, a fine program. So moving on from TV, what about music? Who are some of your favorite musical artists? If we could go into your favorite playlists, who would we see kind of overrepresented in them?
Are you saying now or when I was younger?
Either or. Well, tell me now. Tell me now. Who are you listening to now?
Now I like to listen to well, the oldies for the most part, but actually I really quite enjoy some of the dance music. I like that when I'm walking or working out. I like to listen to jazz when I'm working. Sometimes I've kind of run into lo-fi. I don't know how familiar you are with lo-fi music, but
No.
I'm totally addicted to that when I'm writing. It is just basically sort of I don't kind of jazz, but kind of hip hop, but it's just low in the background, and it's because it's supposed to be like not high quality hi-fi. It's lo-fi, but you should look it up when you're writing it. It's supposed to unleash some creativity, and I find it very relaxing when I'm working, and so I recommend people try lo-fi. You can find it on YouTube. There's like channels on YouTube where you can
Well,
listen
I'll
to
take all the help I can get when I'm writing.
it.
Well, what about when you were younger then? What we listen to back
My
then?
favorite group was the Police. I was addicted to Sting. You had your Love Boat. I had a giant poster of Sting, and I took it to college too. We got to see Sting like right before the pandemic again, which was awesome. I kind of loved the new age music. I grew up in the 80s, went to high school in the 80s, and so I loved
Sure.
the what we called, or not new age, but the new wave. What
Yeah.
do we call it? I can't remember. See, I'm
Yeah,
old.
new wave. All
Yeah, that's what I
sometimes they
listened
call it
to.
alternative, but oh yeah, I love the
Flock of
Police too.
Seagulls, Howard Jones, all that.
Oh yeah. Well, no one ever is to blame. So
Yes, that's true.
I always like to say. How about this? I mean, you write so much, but how do you feel when you are staring at a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen, depending on how it is you write?
There is always a feeling of panic when I start a new book. And I would have to say that every book is harder than the one before. And you would think that after this many books, I would know what I'm doing. But I feel like every time I start, I have to kind of relearn the process. It takes me a long time from the time I start planning a book to getting, really in the final pages of it for me to sort of get in the groove and feel like, okay, I remember what I'm doing here. I know how to write this story, And so I do panic when I'm at a blank page, but I usually force myself to keep going, or I'll write a different scene that I might be struggling with, or I'll leave it for a little while and take a walk and then come back. I can usually figure out, if I'm blocked in how a scene should go, or I write it from a different character's point of view, and that usually solves the problem as well.
Yeah. So you feel those sort of anxious emotions, but you got some workarounds for them, it sounds like.
Right. And when you have deadlines, and as many deadlines as I have, I have to do it, whether I feel like it or not. And that's the one hard lesson I think I had to learn when I first started is when you do this as a profession, you must treat it as your profession. So I go to work every day. I have an office that's away from my home. Fortunately, it's just next door, but it's away from all the chaos. And I walk over and I just treat it like I'm going to work. I get my glass of water and all the things I need to do to start going. And just the things I used to do when I go to the office. You set your workspace around and be in the zone, turn on the music that helps you, or not music, or whatever you need, but just do the steps you need to be creative. I find the older I get, the more I need more room for creativity. I used to be able to write at the dining room table or in the car between my kids' soccer games and things like that, but I need quiet, I need space, I need to be alone. I have a hard time writing when my family's around me being noisy and stuff like that. I need more focus than I used to. And it might be because my stories are more, I don't want to say linear or more complicated, but I have more plots that I have to intertwine. I'm digging deeper with the characters than maybe I used to do in some of my earlier books. Obviously, all writers' work evolves as they are experienced. And I would say mine has definitely evolved into sort of more complicated stories than maybe I used to write.
So in terms of like, you have to treat it like a job. I think that's a very important point to make, especially, for people out there who might be doing it as a hobby. But did something change within you when you went from kind of maybe writing more as a hobby to it being your full-time career?
What changed, I would say, is like any job, it became a job. It was not where I went to escape anymore. It was what I had to do to, pay the bills, basically pay the mortgage and take care of my family. And so there's still joy in it. I still find joy in the written word. There's nothing that compares to looking at your work afterward and thinking, did I really create this? Holding a book in your hands and getting those author copies in the mail and just thinking, did this really come out of me? It still feels like a magical experience, but it is work, and it's hard work. And sometimes I would say before I was published, I would just do it when I felt like it. Even though I really had this dream of being published, I would still take weeks off away from it and then come back to it, be really excited to do it. I don't have that luxury anymore. I have to do it every single day. 6 days a week I work. 6 days a week I try to get my 2,500 words, because that is my job. That's the only way I'm going to meet my deadlines and keep my publisher happy, keep my readers happy, and, keep my career momentum going.
Yeah. What's some of the best advice you could offer to an aspiring author?
The best advice I would have is believe in yourself. That was probably in my early days what I wish I'd done a little bit more of. I didn't really believe in my own dreams. I didn't dream high enough, and so I would say I also had the advice when I was starting out that anybody who wants to be successful in this career can be successful. It just takes, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take work. You're going to have to write a lot of words, but you can find success because of you, because you will try to perfect your work, because you will try to write better, because you will try to keep an eye on trends and figure out what's hot right now and what you might be writing, and figure out how your voice, your particular voice, can fit into those trends.
Yeah. And last but not least, if you could give advice to your younger self, if you could write a letter to your younger self, mail it, and have that, younger RaeAnne open it up, what would you tell your younger self? I know you just mentioned, a couple of things in that last question, but what else would you mention to your younger self?
I would say dream bigger. That was the one thing I didn't really have. I dreamed of maybe hitting the New York Times someday. That was sort of the extent of my dreams. And once I hit that in 2013, I was like, okay, well, I've hit the New York Times. Then what's next? How do I move on from this? And so I just had to believe that I could do it. And that took me several years and many books before I really felt confident in myself. And like I said, every book I still struggle with it, but I would just say dream bigger, keep those dreams alive and dream bigger.
So what's bigger than hitting the New York Times?
Hitting it 14 times like I've done, hitting it with most books that I've written have hit the New York Times since then, and just having a career that is successful, and that I have readers that reach out to me and tell me that I've helped their lives, and that's amazing.
So where can people go buy Summer at the Cape?
They can find it pretty much everywhere, although I think a lot of stores have sold out of it. So hopefully they're going to be reprinting. But I know it's at Walmart. I know it's at Barnes & Noble. Sam's Club has had it. They can order it online, of course, at most of the local vendors. I would also say if you have an indie near you, you can go there and they can order it in for you. Even if they don't necessarily carry it, they can order it for you. So support your indie bookstores.
There you go. I always love to do that. And last but not least, RaeAnne, where can people go to learn more about you? Do you have a website or social media you can share with us?
I have all of those things. They can find me at RaeAnneThayne.com, and it's spelled RaeAnneThayne.com. And then I'm very active on Facebook. I have Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and all the things.
All right. Very good. Well, RaeAnne, this has been a fun conversation. Thank you so much for talking to me about happy endings and happy days.
Right. Happy. That's me. Thank you so much. It was a joy.